Welcome, ambitious leaders, to another power-packed episode of the Executive Pill. I'm your host, Alex Tremble, and I am thrilled to have you join us today. This podcast is where we go beyond the ordinary, moving past the cliches of just work hard to actually uncover the true secrets of success at the executive level. Now, before we dive into today's interview, I have to say some exciting news. Look, thanks to your support, the Executive Pill has been and is still, and I know it will continue to be one of the top 5% most popular shows in the world. And this didn't happen by accident. It was you who made this happen, and will be you who determines the continued success of this show. So here's a call to action from all of our listeners and to all of our listeners. If you enjoy the content we bring each and every week, please do us a favor and support. Click the like button, click the share your thoughts, your questions. This may seem small to you, but it is huge on our end. Your engagement, your enthusiasm keeps this community thriving, and we couldn't be more grateful. Finally, I'm not just your podcast host. I'm an award-winning professional speaker and executive coach. I've spent years distilling the strategies and skills required to propel ambitious leaders like you to unprecedented heights in their career. So if you're seeking an engaging and motivational speaker for your next event, look no further. I've had the privilege of addressing audiences around the world, sharing insights that go beyond the surface and leave a long-lasting impact. So, whether it's developing meaningful relationships with your team, mentors, clients, colleagues, or fellow executives, or if you're focused on providing your audience with the strategies required to achieve exceptional success in the face of complex challenges, we've got you covered here. Don't miss out your opportunity to elevate your team and stakeholders' potential. Visit alextremble.com to book me today to speak at your next opportunity, and we would love to find a way to work together to create some unforgettable events together. Now, with no further ado, let's say today is a good day. See, today we have the always amazing and very well-dressed, dapper Mr. Collin. See, Collin serves as a leader in the human resource arena and currently serves as the human resource director for Say Yes Buffalo. In this role, he sits on the agency's senior leadership team, race, equity and inclusion committee, the self-care committee, and on top of all of this, he is actually the president of the board of directors for the Buffalo Niagara Human Resource Association, having served in that board since 2018. This guy, he's him and I are in the same age break because he's been doing this for a minute. And let me say, I'm gonna get myself in trouble. We are still youngsters. How are you doing today, kind sir?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well. And anytime someone says that I could be a youngster, I'll get with it. So
well, well, well. So I almost like so most people who are listening, you don't get to hear the behind the scenes conversation before we get rolling. And I was telling Colin just as we got started, I was like, okay, man, we're gonna jump into this like double dutch. And immediately I thought, I'm like, man, like I'm not sure how many people in the younger demographic know what double dutch is.
I remember it well. I was terrible at it, but I'm part of that demographic that remembers it. I remembers it being on TV shows. I even remember the show Amen with Sherman Hemsley. He did double dutch as part of the opening. So that's aging myself.
No, it is absolutely not. That just means that we came from an awesome era. And I still remember, like you said, it was on TV, on competitions, in the schoolyard. Man, it was some great cardio. So I am so glad that you and I had the opportunity to connect, specifically on here, because in our conversations prior to, you shared so much that got me thinking about what does it take to be successful in a leadership role. And I'm gonna open a space for you really quickly. But what I want to share for the audience really quickly is that when we were planning this episode, kind of thinking about what to talk about, the one thing both you and I, Colin, decided and agreed upon was that We were not going to lend our head or lay into the fallacy of a hard work being the differentiator that takes you to the top. What are your thoughts on this, sir?
I mean, I often say, and I know people here are tired of it, although they're very kind because they haven't said they are, but I see their faces. Is that I always say you can work smarter or you can work harder, and I think what happens often is that people think, okay, I'm gonna just work harder. And I'm just going to keep sort of doing this, and they're not sort of really taking the opportunity to reflect and say, okay, is this
Mm,
working? Is this effective?
yeah.
What do I need to do in order to be effective? And the other thing, to be real and to call a spade in this space is that a lot of people's career paths are determined by multiple things, and sometimes there are things that they can't control,
Mm,
including their identity. So depending on where you're trying to be a leader, people might say, that's not going to happen for you, sir, ma'am, or they, them, whatever it is. And so I think oftentimes people have to be strategic about where they want to be a leader. And sometimes you want to go into a space that you may have not been traditionally welcome, but make you want to make a path because you may not want to be the first, but there's an opportunity for you to be the first. And so, but you also need to just be aware of that. So I think that you hear that old adage, well, if you work hard, you're gonna go to the top. And I always say, well, asterisk, if you're a cisgender white male, probably sure, but if you start adding additional identities to that, that may not be something that is in multiple people's sort of path or purview.
oh my God, you said so much. I'm loving it. I'm loving it. I gotta start getting sponsored by McDonald's because I'm saying that way too often. Um, I need. So you make me think of you. So again, you said so much. The first thing I think about is a story I tell when I'm giving one of my speeches on leadership success, and long story short, I was driving to the Office of Personnel Management, OPM. So I was driving to that one of their facilities, the Federal Executive Institute, because I'm a coach there. I coach their executives. And as I was driving, I saw this open field, and it was just beautiful. It was just like these beautiful yellow dandelions everywhere. And I took a picture. Like I mean, obviously it wasn't safe, but I took a quick little picture of that field. I'm like, this is amazing. And as I thought more about it, I was like, whoa, like this, how beautiful is this? But many people would identify and label that beautiful field as a field of weeds because dandelions are weeds. And so me being a overly interested in information at times, I Googled what is the definition of a weed. And, a weed is nothing more than a plant that is growing where it wasn't planned to be cultivated. That's it. It means, technically speaking, a rose, the most beautiful rose can be a weed. Most beautiful orchid can be a weed. Anything can be a weed, regardless of how much value it brings to the table. Anything is a weed if it's not wanted there. And so when you talk about, not only, in order for you to be successful, it also requires you to know where you are going to be successful and how difficult it's going to be. um, I love that thought because I tell people, look, you can be the best leader possible for a particular organization, a particular situation. And if they don't value, doesn't mean that you have less value necessarily. It means that maybe they don't require or value those skills, the perspective, what you bring to the table in that situation. So maybe you need to go somewhere else.
Correct. Correct. I often tell people that I advise people similarly in my role as human resources director. We do human resources a little bit different here because we are very much staff supporting. So it is very. Our CEO Dave Rust, and I will always shout him out. Says that our workers are people first, their workers second. And so as a result, that means if we are supporting our people as people and treating them as people, kind, empathetic, etc., they're going to work hard for us, and they have. But oftentimes I talk to them because people want to build careers. They want career paths. And so even here I'd say, yes, there are opportunities for career paths, but we're a small nonprofit. We're about 160 people. So we're continuing to grow. We've been around since 2012. Um, but it's still we're a small nonprofit. So I always often tell people, okay, so let's talk about career path. What does it look like? Is this an opportunity here? Or do you need to look externally? And so I always tell people, I said, you need to make that decision, because if you want to stay here, the career path may be laid out, but there may be some delay, because then you have to think about your own timeline. Is your timeline, a 3-year timeline? You might not
Mm,
be able to pursue that here at Say Yes, depending on what it is that you're looking for. If it's a 5-year timeline, maybe perhaps, but if you're saying, okay, I'm good with staying at Say Yes and doing this timeline and everything, but then you're still getting impatient, you need to sort of and I always say, reflect on it. Every decision can be changed or adjusted. So I said, you might want to really sort of look at that, because you might say, yeah, 3 years is fine, but maybe after a year, you're like, you know what, I really want to do this, and you start getting sort of resentful. And I often tell people, you don't want to be resentful with your career path. You don't want to make decisions about careers when you're under any type of duress. I often
mm,
say you can make a decision about a job under duress, but it's different about a career, because there's differences between jobs and careers. So, I often tell people, if you need money for a particular role, but this is something you're like, I don't want it, but I really need the money, then take it if you really need it. But then think, okay, I need to be developing an exit plan when I'm in there. I'm in here for a particular period of time, and then I'm going to go out, and then I'm going to be pursuing a career. And, so I often say that, because career is long term. Career is not one job. It can be, but nowadays it's generally not. So I often tell people, think about your career path. And I will say this, for as an African American, person of color, whatever you want to call, that's not a conversation that many people in our community have had. So oftentimes it was, find a good job, stay in your job. And certainly from what I heard in my generation when I first started working. And when I often tell people, let's really think about your career. So I say career opportunities we have here. I said, we don't have jobs, we have career opportunities. And let's make that language a thing, so that people can really always be thinking about sort of the long term.
again, you say, we're gonna need more time. You say so much. What's called? I want to. There's two things, directions I want to go. So one is, you talked about what we tend to be told in regards to find a job, keep the job. It's interesting because I obviously that's how I was grew up as well. Get a good job, stay in that job, and then retire at that job if possible, right? And the reality is that as we've moved forward through time, it has been much more difficult to stay in a job, right? There's not as much loyalty on the organizational side, on the employee side. Like, people are moving now more days. There's that the retirement is not always there. The pension isn't always there for organizations. Many organizations don't have pensions anymore, and so I reflect back on what my dad had been telling me about the importance of finding a good job. And so for me, I worked in the government. My father worked in the government. My brother worked in the government, and all of us were, we loved serving the public in those roles. And my dad was always about, hey, keep your good government job. It's stability, it's certainty. And I still remember the first time where I told him, I was, hey, I'm thinking about leaving the government and running my own business. Yeah, I'm really think I can do this. And at first he was like, I don't know, Alex. I don't know. And he was really kind of encouraging me to stay. But then this last Christmas, I was talking to him, and I was like, "Hey, Dad, it's rough, out here sometimes, having your own business, because just scaling the amount of work you have to do as you're building teams and building structures and building everything." I'm like, it's tiring sometimes. And I thought he was going to say, "Well, you can go back to government." But what he said was, he said, "Alex, if anyone can do it, you can do it."
That's
I believe
amazing.
it. Oh my God, he melted my heart, because I feel like, honestly, I think I wanted him to tell me, hey, why don't you go back to a job? Now, I wasn't going to do it, but I think I wanted him to just kind of just be there with me and say how hard it was. But he was like, no, you can do this.
Mhm.
So those conversations are so powerful. And so thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, well, for sure. I mean, one of one of the things I offer here at Say Yes is that when I am, would do new hire orientation, I'm a part of it. I don't do the whole thing because I got a little bit of an HR team now, so I don't have to do the whole thing, thank goodness. But but I often talk to people and tell them that HR looks different here at Say Yes than it does traditionally at other organizations. I said, and I said I consider us a partner to anybody in the organization. We're a partner to programs because of policies and things like that. Make sure that we're able to sort of develop those types of things. Obviously, we're a partner to sometimes supervisors who may be having an issue with a staff person, and they're trying to sort of figure out, okay, well, how do I sort of handle this? But we're also a partner to the staff, and I tell them that looks like different things. I said I'll review your resume. I will. I said we can sit down and have career conversations and really sort of plot that out. And so I tell them all the time. So some people take advantage of this, some people I never see, and but it's really important. I often tell them, I said, you really want to think about what it is that you want to do. So many of we have a younger staff, so many times our staff may be late 20s, maybe early 30s, so they're pretty early in their careers. And so oftentimes I just sort of say, what is it that you're looking for? What is it that you like about your current role? Why did you apply for this role, especially if they're new coming in? And I always often tell people, did the circumstances that existed when you applied for the role and you came into the role, do they still exist today? Are you still as passionate about the work? Do you Are you no longer passionate about the work? Maybe you want to look at something else. Are you looking at the work and saying, it's missing something and I would love to fill whatever the gap is, because then there's maybe opportunity there as we're a growing organization in terms of that type of thing. So I say this often because, again, and I'll do this for everybody in our organization, but it is something, since I am, a Black male, I'm often like, I'm looking at, our team, and our team is actually 60% people of color and women. And so we have, it's different than a lot of organizations, especially here in the Buffalo, Niagara region. But I really want to have those conversations, because oftentimes when I'm doing it, it's the first time people have ever thought about that. So I even say, develop your ideal job description. What does that look like?
Mhm,
I
mhm.
said I'll send you a template. I said make it, and I said I'll review it. We could talk about it. I said, but think about what it is that you would love to do and how that would look to you. And so I often sort of do that, because I was like, you can be pie in the sky, because then you know exactly what it is that you want to do. And then now let's sort of sit down nuts and bolts and figure out ways to get you there.
I mean, everything you're saying, is spot on. And I'll tell you that, me personally, as I rose up through the ranks throughout my career, from manager positions to chief positions and so on and so forth, I actually did the same thing. I always crafted my own PD, saying this is what I want this position to look like, and then I made the pitch to the leader, to the principal I work for. Hey, I think we should restructure it like this. All right, why don't you create this position? I can fill this role because I think this is a need for the organization. And even if it's not always accepted, one, you benefit because you've really then taken the time to think about where you want to focus your energy and effort. But two, now you put that idea into your principal's mind that, one, here are some opportunities that this organization be maybe improved because of these ideas that you popped up. Then two, oh shoot, Tom, Jim, Jane, Tanya, Colin, whoever, they're interested in growth. Oh my God. Okay, let me make sure I'm paying attention to this. Make sure I find opportunities for them. Um, you know you you said something multiple times. You said a word multiple times, when you were just giving this last bit of advice for us. But I want to say it's harder than what most people think. And I'm gonna say the word in a second. I want everyone to kind of think about, what do you think I'm talking about when what word did Colin say that is I'm saying is more difficult than what you think? Because every time I'm engaging with new executive clients, the first thing is I ask them that exact word, and they're all stumped by that word. And that word is want. What do you want? And This is a hard question to answer for most people because we tend to not think about what we want. We're just kind of living through life. Or if you think you want something, it's not what you want, it's what you saw someone else have. So you say, I guess I must want that. Or what you believe that society believes that you should want, or what you think your parents would want you to have. Like, we don't take the time to slow down, reflect on what we actually want. Because once you do that, then you can create a strategy to get there. But that want, that defining want is hard.
It really is. I mean, and I use that word deliberately because, for many years, I didn't know what I wanted. And so when I first graduated from undergraduate from the University of Buffalo, I went and I worked. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I had an English degree. And the only reason why I had an English degree was because originally went for management and accounting. It was terrible. So I didn't know what to do. And I was sort of existing without a major. And then University of Buffalo sent me like a threatening letter and said, "You better pick a major, buddy, because you have to declare something." And I ended up taking a course in the summer, and it was taught by the head of the Department of English. And he said, "Oh, are you an English major?" I said, "No." He said, "You should be one." I said, "What do I have to do?" And he said, "Oh, let's sit down and let's go through the requirements." And I'm looking at this. And I said, "Basically, this is just reading and writing." I said, "Hey, I could do that. That sounds good." But I wasn't thinking, okay, what am I going to do with this when I finish? Because traditionally, English majors would maybe do something in the writing realm, or they would do like teaching. And so, like, I was like, I'm not interested really in doing any of those things. And so, but I did end up working in a school, a charter school here in Buffalo. But I was working at education administration, which was great. So I was there from sort of the beginning of this charter school. Literally, I started 2 weeks before they opened. So I was a part of like a lot of the building aspects. And I basically, I built stuff around, it looks basically, you would say this is HR. I did it, I didn't know it, but I loved that piece, but I still didn't know what I wanted to do. And I thought, well, maybe this is human resources. And so as I sort of was going through my career, I kept looking for opportunities, but I couldn't say in my head, I want a career in HR. I just kept saying, well, I like this. I like this. I'm thinking this. And, one of the things that, I was, bless all these people's hearts that I talked to many people in HR. But for the most part, they were white females because that's how our HR field looks, specifically in the Buffalo Niagara region. And so what they were telling me were things that weren't quite they didn't quite sort of match what was going on in my life. I mean, at this stage of the game, I'm maybe 10 years into my work experience. So to
Mhm.
tell me go back to school and get an MBA with an HR concentration, and I had just gotten a master's degree in organizational leadership, did not
Mhm.
make sense to me. Or to say, well, you could, you can go into an HR, department, but you're going to have to start at the bottom. So and so then looking at sort of what that might look like for my salary and be like, well, I can't afford to suddenly just cut my salary. And I was a single gentleman then. I'm a single gentleman right now too, but I was like, I'm supporting myself. So it's not like I have another, I have some other income coming in. So I was like, that doesn't make sense for me. So I remember sort of having these conversations and like, well, this field is clearly not for me because there's just no way that I could get in. This advice has
Mm.
been written and things like that. So I remember that vividly. And so I remember every experience that I've had and the negative experiences that I've had in my work experience, which has been sadly several, several, several. Um, I have always said, okay, well, I learned something there, and I am going to always create a space where if I have an opportunity to be the person who did this thing to me, or set things up that negatively affected me, if I'm privileged enough to be in that space, I am going to create a space that no one will ever have to go through that again. So
Yeah.
even when it comes to sort of these conversations about with HR, I have multiple people that come into me and like, I'm interested in a career. What does this look like? So, and I literally start with, well, what is it that you want? What do you like about HR? I said HR is a huge, huge, huge field.
Yep.
So there's multiple things that you want to look at. I always send them to the SHRM website. So I'll plug SHRM.org. And I send them to the Buffalo Niagara Human Resources Association website if if they're local, bnhra.org, because I'll promote that as well. But so I often send there because I said you really want to sort of take a look at what it is that you want to do. Saying I want a career in HR or I'm interested in a career in HR is usually what people are saying. And then you start asking those follow-up questions, and people are like, "Well, I'm not sure." So I say, take the time, look, research, see what it is about the field that you want to do, and then let's talk.
Preacher. There's two things I want to pull out right there. One um, is I have always been. So I wrote this book. My first book I wrote actually was called The GPS Guide to Success, and it was about identifying a goal and then a plan to get there. And one of the things I strongly recommend is that people stay away from job titles. Um, don't focus on the job title. Focus on what you want to do. I like this aspect, this aspect, this aspect. Because if you understand those different pieces that you like to do, you may be able to create your own job title. You know, create a new position. If you can articulate clearly what you're interested in. Again, I do this with executives all the time. As they're networking and talking to other people, and they're just talking about those different things they're interested in, someone may say, "Oh, wow, we have a position that does X, Y, and Z." But if you would have said HR, if you would have said marketing director, and they don't have that role, then they don't think about you anymore, right? So it's so important to spend that time to think about those different functions and what do you actually enjoy doing, and be able to communicate those. And then second, I just I mean, you're so right in regards to there being people who bless their heart, they really believe they're giving you some great advice, and this is sage advice. You just follow it, but it's not the right advice for you. And so I always tell people, even as I do a lot of training on mentoring relationships, how to build those relationships and programs. Even if you have a fantastic mentor, you still have to have analytical thinking. You have to know whether that advice is just great advice, but maybe it's not great advice for you in the moment that you're in right now. And so maybe you need to ask some more questions, or find another person who maybe has a different perspective, or who more closely related to your situation, who may be able to provide some advice that's more tailored to your need.
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely agree. I mean, I'll never forget. It's one of these sort of defining moments, and it was. Gosh, now coming up on 8 years ago, I guess. My grandmother passed away, and she was 86. She had lived a nice long life, but it was happened so quickly.
Yeah.
And I had found out the morning I was supposed to be meeting with an HR person to sort of talk about career opportunities, and and it was something that had been set up by I think it was maybe my executive coach, my former executive coach had set this up, and I was like, okay. And so I literally had gotten this phone call that my grandmother was in hospital, and then it was like, okay, and then it was like, okay, you need to get here immediately, and I'm like getting ready to go, and then literally like 10 minutes later, it's like, oh, she's gone. So I'm like,
Oh.
what? And then I was like, I had this meeting. It was like 8 a.m. I did not have the woman's phone number. We had set something up, I think, via email. And I was like, well, so I was going back and forth. I didn't know what to do, didn't know what to do. So I just said, okay, well, I thought about it and I prayed on it, and I heard my grandmother's voice saying, "Well, there's nothing you can do for me. So why don't you just do this? You need to really sort of take this meeting." So I went to this meeting, and I was in like this weird sort of zone. But I remember I had my questions. I asked. I listened attentively, and and she really thought she was giving me some advice, and she was a nice lady. And
Mhm.
so she wasn't like she was it wasn't like she was full of herself or anything like that. But I was really listening to this. And I remember I thought to myself at the time, I said, this literally doesn't relate to anything that I have at all. And you have my
Mm.
resume. Like I was sent to you, and it was clear she hadn't reviewed it, and she didn't have it with her. So she's saying this stuff. And I remember I thought to myself, I said to her, I said, I'm here. My grandmother has just passed away, and I'm sitting here listening to you jibber jabber about stuff that's not making sense in this moment in time. So obviously, I know I was emotionally heightened, but at the
Yeah.
same time, I just remember thinking, this is so unhelpful. And one of the things that I often advise people who are in leadership roles um, is that you may want to think about before think about what you're going to say before you talk to someone, especially if you're going to give career advice or things like that, because perhaps it's not your that's not your path. Maybe you just people ask you about that, you say,
Mhm.
oh, I've had a few things happen here and there, but you know who would be really good to talk to you about career advice? X or Y or whomever it is, because I think what happens is a lot of times with leaders and executive leaders too, we can be in these roles for a while and we're just thinking, hey, people want to they need to do what I did, or I really have something to say. And sometimes
Mhm.
I think people aren't taking the right amount of time or care
Mhm.
before they're having those conversations, because what you say is so important and it could be
Yeah.
critical to
Yeah.
someone's career path or even their lives and their livelihood. So I often say this because I just think it's so important, and I think sometimes it can be very damaging in terms of who's saying what to whom.
I want to open up this talking point again. I would love you to say more on that. And I'll say really quickly, I've done a lot of interviews of executive leaders and specifically executive leaders who've been successful and remain successful. And I still think, again, it happened so many different times, but there's one time I remember I was walking down the street having this call with someone, just kind of doing some interviews and collecting some information while I was walking. And I was like, okay, so, like, how did you get to where you are? Like, how did you get here? And the person started talking about um, how they rose to the ranks. And I said, well, like, what strategies did you employ as you got here? And the person said, "Oh, no, no, there's no strategy. There's no strategy. I mean, I don't work. I don't. All I just work hard, and life happens, and you just end up here. I'm not a huge fan of strategizing or planning anything. You just work hard, and you'll get there." And I all I could think to myself, and again, I appreciate the person providing this information, was that advice can hurt someone.
Hmm.
Um, because yes, there are people who may have the lucky opportunities handed to them. Um, but I would say that's even far and few between. These people, these leaders are doing something,
Hmm.
whether it's how they speak to people, who they're speaking to, how they position their projects, how they navigate organizational politics. Like, these are all things you're doing. Maybe you're not thinking of it, right? Maybe you're naturally navigating these spaces. That is great. I mean, you got that sixth sense, right? But to tell someone, give someone advice to just go through life, don't worry about it, you just work hard, like that can actually damage someone's career, because that is not how you get to the top.
No, and I would say certainly for my experience in terms of with my identity, that is not something that has happened. So I would never offer that, and I agree. I really do think that people need to think about what it is. If someone's asking a question, really
Yeah.
think and reflect. I always
Yeah.
tell people you don't have to respond right away. Take a breath. I advise that when people are in interviews. I always tell people, take a breath before you respond, because it gives you an opportunity to sort of think about something before you saying it. And this is the same thing that I would advise leaders who are asked about these things, because you really want to consider what is asked. Like you said, they have employed some sort of strategy, and sometimes people are very blessed where they can just sort of like move through these spaces, but they're still strategizing
Hmm.
because they have been taught generally, within their culture, whatever it looks like,
Hmm.
somebody has told them how to maneuver these spaces.
Hmm.
And I think that, but they just don't, it's so embedded in them that they're not thinking about it. So they're just like, oh yeah, life's happening. Or I just sort of, I just get in with the right people. You hear something like that. Well, what does that mean exactly? Who are the right
Hmm.
people? How do you quote unquote get in with them? You really have to start thinking about that. I talk about, here at Say Yes, we have an award-winning leadership program called Leadership 101. I have a new cohort that has just started, and I talked about some of the things that we're going to be discussing, but one of them is networking. and effective networking and what that looks like and why that's important, especially important in in a region like Buffalo, Niagara, where everybody sort of knows everybody. So, really sort of talking about that. But that's a strategy. And I told people, I said, that is going to be a strategy that will help you, especially as you are developing as a leader. And so I said, and so some people will become comfortable with it. Some people will never become comfortable with it, but at least you'll know how to do it effectively. And you could choose whether or not you want to do it effectively, but at least you'll have that skill. And I think that's really important for people to sort of hear and to learn and to think about. And especially again, my executive folks, if you're offering advice, please make sure that you're offering advice that is specific to the person that you're speaking to. I think that that is really important.
Okay, everyone. I'm not going to be talking a lot, but I guess I have to underscore what Collin just talked about. One, that piece about, again, if this is one takeaway that you could take away from the day, slow down. Especially if you're trying to mentor someone, you're trying to help someone, trying to provide advice for someone, slow down. Think about what they're asking and think about your answer in the regard as it relates to their context, not you, not how do you think it would apply to their context? And then, yes, so thank you so much. So just take the time to reflect before you answer. The second one, I love that you said networking. Again, this is what I talk about, my most recent book, Relationships That Work. It's a skill, it's a strategy around this. I love that you said, maybe you choose not to do it, but at least you have the skills. At least you know how to do it at a fundamental level. And you can always say, you know what? I'm gonna close my eyes to it. I'm not gonna worry about relationships, which doesn't make sense because everything we do is with someone else. Like, it's the relationship, whether you're partnering with someone or you're reaching out to your community or your stakeholders or your executive leadership team or your staff. That's all about building relationships. And that's all networking is building relationships. So I love those 2 points. I know we're starting to run up against our time. And I know you got to jump out to go meet with the mayor of Buffalo. Is there any final advice or thoughts you'd like to share with the audience as we begin to wrap up?
So I guess what I would say is, well, first of all, I'm gonna say, I want anybody thinking that I'm actually meeting with the mayor of Buffalo. 'Cause, somebody in Buffalo here said, they were like, "Wait, he was doing what now?" I was like, "No, that's a joke." But I will say that if I could leave, the people who are listening to this, so whether you're from an executive level or you're just starting your career, your mid-level career, just trying to figure things out, the thing that one of the things I often tell people, I said, approach every interaction from a lens of empathy and kindness. And I think that if you do that, and I say this for our executive folks too, who may be in that position where people are asking them things. If you are approaching people from that lens, the things that we talked about in terms of really sort of answering questions that are specific to the person and things like that, that'll automatically be happening because you are approaching the interaction from that lens of empathy and kindness. And it's the same thing, with, I would say, with the folks who are asking those things too, because sometimes people, you're asking people things and they don't know how to answer it, or they may be unable to answer it, or it may not be a great time to answer it. So I think that is really important. But the other thing that I would say to individuals, especially those who are feeling like they don't know, they're feeling like they're at a crossroads, really sit down and think about what it is that you want to do. Reflect on what it is that you're doing right now. Reflect on the things that you like about what you're doing right now. And then try to research, ways that you could maybe increase that, sort of expand on that. Or if you hate everything that you're doing right now, think about what it is that you want to do. It's really about the want. There is so much opportunity. Right now, there are more jobs than there are people to fill the jobs. So I keep saying it's a job seeker's market, but you have to know what it is that you want to do in order to find the right fit for you.
Whew, man, today was a good. Oh, this is so good. See, I told y'all today was a good day. So again, thank you so much, Collin, for jumping on with us today. I appreciate everything you shared. And the audience, you know what I'm about. You know where I'm going with this. If you found something of value from today's episode, don't look back, reach back. Don't say that person over there should have been here. They could have grown from here. This would have helped them if they would have been here. Don't do that. Just bring the episode to them or bring them to the episode. All you got to do is click like, click share. It's a link. Literally bring this information to them, because if it helped you in any way, I promise you it'll be just as, if not more helpful for your friends, your colleagues, your family members. So please don't look back, reach back. And I have to tell you again, we talked about this, the book Relationships That Work. Again, you can find it in the description. You can find it online on Amazon. This book is meant specifically to help leaders such as you develop those relationships, so meaningful and intentional relationships with those individuals around you, to help you be successful, not only for you and your family, but because your organization and your community relies on the relationship that you build in order to be successful and manage these programs. So check out that book. As always, I encourage all of you to stay strong, stay positive, and definitely stay moving. See ya. Thanks for listening to The Executive Appeal with Alex Tremble. I invite you to follow The Executive Appeal wherever you listen to podcasts. Follow me, your host, Alex Tremble, across all socials or via email for exclusive webinars, courses, and in speaking engagements on continued topics of executive leadership. So until next time, stay strong, stay positive, and definitely stay moving.